if you want to grow and become a more empowered version of yourself, you have to break the habit of being yourself. You have to realize, first of all, that who you are today is not set in stone. Who you are today and how you perceive yourself to be is shaped more or less organically throughout your evolution by a lot of conscious and unconscious decisions and beliefs that you accumulated. There is this concept of a self-image, which is nothing but a bundle of narratives and stories that you got so accustomed to that you now deem them to be the truth, the objective truth. But you, yourself, the self itself, as you think about it, it's not static, it's not fixed. And it doesn't exist as such, as an entity, right? As a specific entity in your mind. It's just a bunch of narratives. It's just a bunch of beliefs. So who you are is ultimately subject to dispute, subject to change. And you change anyway, with or without your conscious will. But if you take ownership of this process of you changing, then you get to direct your fate in a way. One of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung is, if you don't make your unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Meaning that if you don't get into the lens of conscious awareness, those ingrained core beliefs that direct your life in an unconscious way, you will not know that you are basically just drifting towards oblivion, maybe, and you have nothing, no ways to counteract that. And I like to discuss in this video a concept that changed the way I approach things and change itself. And that is the match, or let's say the relationship between past and future, in terms of how we can use that to drive change and to transform ourselves. I would like to start by making the case for past and future being just mere concepts. What we call past is simply an accumulation of stored experiences, subjectively stored experiences in the brain that we can recollect actively, on demand or not, and we relive in a way an experience that we know we lived it in the present at some point, right? In terms of timeline, in terms of actual time, there is nothing but this present moment. And we living this timeless but ever-changing present moment gives us the chance to parse the experience and store it through mechanisms of the brain in memories, right? But each memory is ultimately nothing but a subjective storage of something happening with you or within you or outside of you. And the so-called past, it's not a fixed thing, it's simply our ability to remember a lived experience. That lived experience, of course, always occurs in the present moment. Now, when it comes down to future, it's even more interesting because the future doesn't exist either as such. It's still a concept. But we artificially create our future typically against past experiences, things that we already lived. And we create a future which allows us to avoid or mitigate some lived experiences that were a bit detrimental, let's say. So things that we want to avoid. We create our future in a way that gives us some sort of security that we won't live something that we already lived and we didn't like, right? So this means that we are actively creating our future through a continuous projection of lived experiences that we are familiar with. So we live something, we store that experience in our past. Then when it comes down to experiencing similar things, having similar experiences in the projected future, we tap into those memories and we create actively similar situations in the future based on our experience in the past, right? So when it comes down to changing yourself or transforming yourself or growing into someone that you want to become, the past is not a very good resource to use. Because if you want to grow, if you want to become someone greater in terms of capacity, abilities, I don't know, skill set, and so on, greater than you are today, simply looking at your past is not a good way of helping you going to the next level, because you don't have the kind of lived experience that matches the experiences that your future self will have to live in the end, right? So imagining that you want to become someone who is very good at, I don't know, math. This is just your dream, right? You want to be, I don't know, number one in math in your school or in your nation or whatever, right? Compete at very high level in math. If you have no past, no experience in your past as you being good at math, there is no way that you will become good at math by just looking at your past experience. So this traditional timeline of past informing the present and then informing inevitably the future is a flawed kind of way of looking at things if you really want to become someone that you've never been up to that point. If you want to grow into someone who lives the life that you find ideal, but you didn't live yet, you didn't experience yet, you cannot just imagine that life you cannot just imagine that life will appear in existence based on experiences you lived in the past, because the past doesn't have that kind of experience, right? So a better way to approach this is to change the timeline, to reverse the timeline, to engineer and imagine a future that is the kind of future which you would like to live, like you consciously created, artificially in a way. You imagine exactly how that future looks like, and then you let that future inform the activities and the actions that you carry out in the present. And furthermore, this future will allow you to look into your past and learn some interesting lessons that will help you do the things or grow faster towards that ideal future, towards that ideal life. Because you will rewrite, in a way, past experiences that you would typically consider as being just lived past experiences. And instead, you can look at your past in a new way, in a new curious way, and learn new lessons that you might not have understood like that if you just look at the past without this kind of goal ahead of you, right? So the future is essential for guiding your current activities, because it has to inform how you live today in a way that is not representative of how you lived up to this point. If all you do is let your past inform your present, you will just get in the future more of the familiar past. Does it make sense? So this normal timeline of you going through life in a more or less haphazard way, it's the typical way of going through life. But if you have ambitious goals, and if you want to become someone that no one really understands but you have to be able to look at the past as you would look as a familiar memory. Because the past is built also artificially in your mind. The same way you store a memory from the past is the same, you can store also a memory of the future if you want. When you imagine, when you visualize a certain lived experience in the future, let's imagine that you have a vision which is representative for the kind of life that you want to build, and you visualize or you imagine yourself achieving that vision, or maybe you achieve a goal which is representative for living that vision. Well, that's not unlike an actual memory. If you think about it, it's just happening also in your mind. The same way you recollect in your mind a lived experience from the past, you can also recollect in a way a future lived experience in the future, right? So in terms of bringing that felt experience in your current conscious present moment, there is no difference between a past lived experience and the future to be lived experience. But now, if you are more in contact with the future that you want to live at some point, in the future, right? If you want to get more in contact with your ideal self, let that occupy your mind. Let your ideal self tell you how you should live today. Because if your ideal self will inform the actions and the decisions that you take in the present moment, you detach yourself from the bondage of your past, and you are able to do things which will allow you to live a different future than just, basically reliving your past in a way that is familiar to you. If you look at the past to inform the future, you will never get to where you want to go. If you look at the future to inform your present and allow you to rewrite your past so that you learn lessons that you would otherwise not be able to learn, this is a winning strategy. Because again, everything is a concept in your mind. The past and the future, they don't exist as such. They exist as abilities of our mind to interfere with this, so-called timeline. But everything is just lived today. Everything is lived now in this very moment. And your mind is a tool to access those lived experiences. And the mind is a powerful tool in that sense that it can also anticipate the future. It can live the future. It can already imagine how the future can look like. And that's just up to you to decide. And that's the nice thing about it, right? Because it's ultimately up to you. It's your decision. It's also your responsibility. Because if you don't get to live the future that you want to live, it's no one's fault. It's your sole responsibility to build the kind of life that you want to live and get inspiration from it to guide your everyday decisions in real time as much as possible, and use that future as a positive anchor to guide your decision making throughout the day. And every single day, you just execute against the set of behaviors and routines that are naturally embodied by your future self. And these habits and lifestyle routines, they are most probably not representative of how you lived your life up to this point. But again, if you want a different kind of life, I like this quote from Joe Dispenza, and he says that if you want change, you have to change. If you want to live a different future, you have to break the habit of being yourself, right? You have to just become someone else. And how can you become someone else? where, well, luckily, this concept of a self or a self-image is fluid. It's not static. You are not who you were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You can change. You can decide who you want to be in terms of how you look, in terms of how you think, in terms of what matters to you, your values, your principles, your personality, the people you surround yourself with, your friends. Nothing is static. Nothing is rigid. Everything is up to your own debate, to your own internal agreement, and to your own liking ultimately. And this is so freeing and so powerful, right? You can become whoever you want to become, but you have to be clear on who you want to become and why. Because if you have a strong why and a good set of values that are in alignment with that why, then you will inevitably go towards that vision because it will pull you forward, right? There will be like a forward pull in the context of positive emotions, and those emotions will drive your everyday actions so that inevitably, eventually, but inevitably, you will get to live that future. And when you will get that at that point in the future, it will also, of course, be the present, right? So whenever something happens in the future, it will always be the present moment. And I think if we would be deeply aware of that thing, we will not postpone things anymore. Because postponing things means that we believe in magic somehow, right? We believe that, at some point in the future, things will just magically line up. And it will happen to be, things will happen to be and work to our liking, in alignment with how we want them to work by magic somehow, right? But it cannot be like that. It has to be a conscious choice. This very moment and this day has to be as closely aligned as possible to the kind of future that you want to live. And then the more you live in alignment with that future, the more you will build the kind of habits which are conducive to you living that future, because you will be that person, you will live that future. But it has to be a conscious choice. It cannot just be some sort of an automatic way of living, and by some sort of a miracle, you get to live your ideal life. No, the life by design requires work, requires effort, requires sacrifice as well. Because if you want to get something you really care about, you have to be able to renounce everything else that doesn't matter. Because everything else that doesn't matter steals your energy and adds on top unnecessary burden to you. Things that you don't need or care are added to your life by default, and if you are not careful, you will have to then care about them as well. Everything requires maintenance in life. But if you know exactly what you want, if you know exactly how you want to live, if you want to create this life by design, then it's up to you to choose those very elements which are intrinsic to that life and just carry those activities which are in alignment with those activities, right? With those goals, with those values. Nothing more, nothing less. So think from the future, not from the past. Thinking from the past to inform the present is just a life by default. I live today, today becomes my tomorrow's past, right? Today is the past. And then I will just relive the same past over and over and over again. And my future will be informed by my past. Instead of that, live from the future. I let my future inform how I live today, so that I also have the responsibility of looking at my past and learning from it what I have to learn in order to find the lessons that will help me move towards the future that I create by design. So transformation is not easy. It requires effort. It requires commitment to a goal that's meaningful to you, towards a purpose that you have to deeply investigate for yourself. But it's worth it. because it's a lifelong journey in which you will never get bored, and you will get to live in alignment with your core values and do the things that fulfill you and give you meaning. And what can be better than this? So try it.